Welcome to The Debate. Today we are analyzing a phenomenon that sits squarely at the intersection of metabolic science and, well, digital commerce. We're looking at the commercialization of extreme keto by influencers and the actual efficacy of exogenous ketone supplements.
It is, honestly, it's a completely wild landscape out there right now.
It really is. So the central question we are examining is this. Is the entire ecosystem of extreme keto products and influencer claims a complete metabolic mirage, driven purely by caloric restriction and digital fraud? Or do the underlying biochemical mechanisms of exogenous ketones possess legitimate physiological signaling properties that we shouldn't dismiss despite the predatory marketing?
And that is a critical distinction to make because the marketing is just deafening right now.
Precisely. And this discussion emerges from a pretty comprehensive set of source materials. We are looking at clinical trials published in the journal Nutrients and the PMC database, systematic forensic investigations into metabolic fraud, and insights from registered dietitians and exercise physiologists. I will be arguing that extreme keto products are biologically ineffective. The results people claim to see rely entirely on standard caloric restriction, which is then masked by an incredibly sophisticated layer of fraudulent marketing.
And I'll be arguing that while the deceptive commercial landscape and the influencer marketing of these products are undeniably fraudulent, throwing the baby out with the bathwater is a massive mistake. Dismissing exogenous ketones entirely obscures the legitimate, scientifically documented signaling effects of exogenous beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB.
All right, let me outline my position clearly right out of the gate here. The extreme keto industry is built on a foundation of biological impossibilities. Clinical nutritional ketosis is not just a casual state you can opt into with a sugary snack at 2 p.m.
No, definitely not.
Right. It requires strict carbohydrate restriction. We are talking typically under 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. And the goal of that restriction is to achieve and maintain 0.5 to 5.0 millimoles per liter of BHB in the capillary blood. That is a fundamental systemic shift in how the body processes substrate metabolism. Commercial supplements, like these keto gummies and low-dose pills flooding social media, simply cannot physically induce this state.
Look, I don't disagree with the sheer absurdity of a keto gummy.
Yeah, and the clinical data completely supports this skepticism. A 6-week controlled study published in the PMC database demonstrated that adding BHB salts to a hypocaloric diet, a diet where you're eating fewer calories than you burn, produced absolutely no significant difference in fat mass reduction or lean mass preservation compared to a placebo. Therefore, any weight loss flaunted by influencers on social media is strictly the result of calories in, calories out. It's just standard caloric restriction. If it isn't that, it's deceptive digital practices. The supplements themselves are doing nothing.
Okay, I hear that, but let's run at the flip side. While the influencer marketing of gummies is undeniably fraudulent, and yes, we will certainly agree that a sugar-filled keto gummy is a physiological oxymoron, dismissing exogenous ketones entirely ignores highly complex metabolic science. BHB is not just a passive fuel source. It isn't just a backup generator the body kicks on when carbohydrates are low. It is a highly active signaling metabolite.
Wait, what do you mean by an active signaling metabolite in this specific context?
I mean, it tells the body how to operate, not just giving it the fuel to do so. If we look at the 2025 Nutrients study, researchers demonstrated that an 8-week regimen of exogenous BHB supplementation during caloric restriction led to a preservation of resting metabolic rate and a significant reduction in LDL cholesterol.
But again, that was during caloric restriction.
Yes, it was, but these are critical physiological markers that don't typically behave that way under standard restriction. Properly dosed exogenous ketones modulate mTORC1 signaling. For our listeners, think of mTORC1 as the body's master switch for cell growth and muscle preservation. When properly dosed, these ketones flip that switch to protect your muscle tissue from breaking down. They exhibit anti-catabolic properties that operate independently of strict carbohydrate restriction. We have to separate the actual biological mechanism from the carnival barkers selling watered-down products.
Okay, let's focus on that mechanism versus standard caloric restriction, because the laws of thermodynamics simply cannot be bypassed. I don't care how much a TikToker insists they can.
Nobody's saying calories don't matter.
But that is exactly what extreme keto marketing says. We can look at the insights from exercise physiologists like Dr. Michael Israel, who points out that the human body is highly efficient at conserving energy. You cannot simply push the gas pedal, take a supplement, and eat whatever you want. The narrative pushed by extreme keto influencers that you can eat massive calorie-dense meals of bacon and cheese, pop a gummy, and effortlessly drop 50 pounds is a physiological fiction.
Well, of course it is. Extreme dieting followed by heavy eating is deeply detrimental to metabolic health.
Exactly. And the 6-week PMC study I referenced earlier explicitly proved that short-term changes in body composition are driven by that caloric restriction. It is the energy deficit that forces the body to utilize stored adipose tissue, your body fat. It is not the level of circulating ketones or the specific macronutrient distribution. The supplements are merely riding the coattails of the caloric deficit.
Let's pause on the scale for a second. Yes, an aggressive caloric deficit will cause the number on the scale to drop. But what kind of weight are we actually losing? Because standard brute force calorie restriction usually means you're burning through functional muscle, not just fat. Often 20 to 30% of the weight lost is fat-free mass, meaning skeletal muscle.
Which is precisely why resistance training is recommended during any weight loss phase.
Right, but if you lose that muscle, it's a massive problem because it negatively impacts metabolic adaptation. It effectively slows down your resting metabolism and practically guarantees rebound weight gain the moment you stop dieting. This is where the 8-week nutrient study provides a vital counterpoint to your PMC study. Exogenous ketones can actually mitigate this lean tissue loss.
Even without resistance training?
The BHB directs traffic. The group supplemented with BHB maintained their resting metabolic rate. Furthermore, they experienced a drop in LDL cholesterol. That is a highly rare occurrence during active fat mobilization.
Explain why that's rare, because I think most people assume losing fat automatically lowers cholesterol.
It's counterintuitive. When you are in a deep caloric deficit and actively shrinking fat cells, you are releasing stored triglycerides and cholesterol from your adipose tissue directly into your bloodstream to be burned or processed. So circulating cholesterol typically goes up during active rapid weight loss. The fact that the BHB group saw a drop in LDL suggests that BHB has unique metabolic and lipid-clearing benefits that standard caloric restriction completely lacks. It is not just about losing weight. It is about signaling the body to spare the muscle and clear the lipids.
Okay, I see the theoretical value there, but let's look at the physical and chemical limitations of the actual commercial products being sold to consumers to achieve this so-called signaling. Let us focus on the molecular flaws of the products aggressively pushed online. We have what I call the dosage problem.
Yeah, the math on the gummies doesn't add up.
It doesn't even come close. To achieve a therapeutic dose of BHB that could theoretically trigger the signaling mechanisms you're talking about, modulating that mTRC1 switch, a person requires 10 to 12 grams of the compound. However, a standard commercial capsule or gummy only holds 500 to 750 milligrams.
Right, so you'd have to swallow a handful of 20 pills just to hit the baseline?
At once. A consumer would have to take 15 to 20 pills in a single sitting just to reach an efficacious dose. And it gets so much worse when you look at the isomerism.
The racemic mixtures.
Exactly. It's practically chemical fraud. Over 99.9% of these commercial pills and powders use a racemic mixture, meaning they contain equal parts of DBHB and LBHB isomers. Just to clarify for anyone listening, an isomer is essentially a molecule with the same chemical formula but a different structural arrangement. But here's the kicker. Human biology only endogenously produces and utilizes the DBHB isomer for ATP production, which is our cellular energy currency.
The LBHB is largely along for the ride.
It's worse than that. Giving someone equal parts D and L isomers when the body only uses the D isomer is like selling someone a pair of shoes where both are for the left foot and claiming it's a complete set. Because of this, these supplements are inherently less than 50% as effective as they claim on the label. They are chemically incapable of doing what the marketing promises.
Look, I'm right there with you on the fraud. I fully acknowledge the physical limitations of pills and gummies. Selling a low-dose, under-formulated racemic gummy as a ketosis trigger
is scientifically unsupported and predatory. But we have to pivot to defend the mechanism itself. The flaw lies in the commercial delivery and the dosage, not the physiological concept of exogenous ketosis.
But if the commercial delivery is the only way the public gets it, the concept is moot.
Not in a clinical setting. When properly administered, specifically via ketone esters or high-dose mineral salts formulated with the correct DBHB isomeric profile, exogenous ketones do exactly what they are designed to do. They acutely raise plasma BHB concentrations within 30 to 60 minutes. They completely bypass the need for prolonged, agonizing carbohydrate restriction. This is a profound tool for metabolic research and clinical application. Condemning exogenous ketones because scammers put a pinch of racemic dust in a gummy is like condemning hydration because someone sold you a thimble of water in the desert.
I would argue that the thimble of water is the entirety of the consumer experience with extreme keto. This entire phenomenon only survives due to fabricated social proof and an incredibly sophisticated digital infrastructure of deception. If the products actually worked as advertised, they wouldn't require systemic, highly coordinated fraud to sell.
You're talking about the deep fakes.
I am talking about the total misappropriation of institutional science and celebrity likenesses. Scammers are now utilizing generative AI and deepfakes to clone the voices and perfectly manipulate the lip movements of Shark Tank investors like Mark Cuban and Lori Grainer. They are hijacking the identities of celebrities like Kelly Clarkson and Dolly Parton to create synthetic endorsements. And it doesn't stop at pop culture celebrities. It extends to academia.
The famous Harvard study claim.
It is everywhere. Scammers take a legitimate 2023 Harvard meta-analysis showing that plant-based, low-carb diets improve mortality in type 2 diabetes patients. That is real science. But then they maliciously twist that data into a claim that their proprietary keto pills possess a Harvard-proven 24% success rate for instant weight loss. It's not just that they're lying about a Harvard study. It's that they are weaponizing real science and twisting it into a Harvard-proven magic pill to prey on consumer desperation. It is an intentional obfuscation of science to sell a mirage.
I completely concede that the influencer space is currently a severe misinformation crisis. The study from Dublin City University proves your point beautifully. They analyzed 67,000 diet and nutrition videos on TikTok. Think about that sample size. And they found that a staggering 98% of them were inaccurate or lacked scientific evidence.
98% is practically a guarantee that what you are watching is false.
It is a landscape dominated by grifters using absolute terms to prey on consumer desperation. However, I maintain that this carnival barker noise shouldn't invalidate clinical ketogenic metabolic therapies. Why do you think these scammers hijack concepts like Johns Hopkins research on autophagy?
Let's quickly define autophagy for the audience.
Right, so autophagy is essentially cellular recycling. It's the body's way of cleaning out damaged cells to regenerate newer, healthier ones. It is incredibly important for longevity and disease prevention, and fasting or ketosis can trigger it. Now, why do scammers hijack that Johns Hopkins data or the Harvard data or the metabolic signaling properties of BHB? They do it precisely because the underlying science is so powerful and legitimate. The scammers recognize the clinical validity of metabolic adaptation, and they weaponize that validity to sell shortcuts. The challenge for the scientific community and for consumers is untangling this highly sophisticated digital fraud from the legitimate clinical research. We cannot allow generative AI deepfakes to dictate what areas of biochemistry we consider valid.
But when the digital fraud is the primary vehicle through which the public interacts with the science, the resulting harm cannot be ignored. The extreme keto ecosystem actively erodes consumer health integrity. When people are told they can achieve a profound metabolic state without changing their dietary habits, they are being set up for failure.
And failure usually breeds resentment toward actual science.
Exactly. When they inevitably fail to lose 50 pounds in a month while eating fast food and taking a low-dose gummy, they don't blame the fraudulent company, they blame themselves. Or, worse, they dismiss nutritional science entirely. Oh, diets just don't work for me. This fosters a deep skepticism toward legitimate lifestyle interventions. Furthermore, The extreme promises pushed by these deepfakes exacerbate body image issues and muscle dysmorphia, leading to incredibly dangerous behavioral loops. The clinical reality is that metabolic adaptation takes months of consistent dietary intervention. Selling it as an overnight fix via a commercially compromised pill is biologically impossible.
The marketing is indefensible, but the ethical bankruptcy of the marketing does not negate the biochemical reality of the molecule. You are absolutely correct that the public interaction is deeply flawed. But let's return to the physiology of a person genuinely trying to improve their health. When we look at individuals who are attempting significant weight loss, the preservation of lean mass is perhaps the single most important factor in long-term success.
Because muscle drives the metabolism.
Precisely. Standard caloric restriction, which you championed earlier, often leads to that metabolic slowdown that all but guarantees weight regain. Exogenous ketones, when properly formulated as high-dose esters or specific mineral salts, offer a genuine physiological bridge. By modulating that mTRC1 pathway we talked about, they signal the body to spare skeletal muscle even when calories are deeply restricted. This isn't marketing, this is cell biology. If we can eventually reform the delivery mechanisms and regulate the market, exogenous BHB could address one of the greatest clinical limitations of standard diet interventions, which is muscle wasting.
Let's unpack the practicality of that clinical application for a second. Even if we assume a perfectly formulated high-dose DBHB ester is available, no racemic mixtures, no underdose gummies, it is still not a standalone solution.
It's an adjunct, yes.
But the PMC study clearly showed that without the caloric deficit, the exogenous ketones did not independently drive fat loss. The signaling benefits you mentioned, the potential muscle sparing, the lipid clearing, are highly context-dependent. They are heavily reliant on a concurrent hypocaloric state. The danger here is that your narrative of the active signaling metabolite is too easily co-opted by the very scammers we are criticizing. The moment we validate exogenous ketones as a tool for weight loss outside of strict, clinically supervised ketogenic metabolic therapies, we provide ammunition for the next wave of influencer fraud. The most effective, evidence-based approach remains the foundational elements of health: a sustained energy deficit, adequate protein intake, and resistance training to preserve lean mass.
But relying solely on brute force behavioral changes ignores the reality of metabolic adaptation over time. We know that as people lose weight, their hunger drive drastically increases, and their rest and energy expenditure drops. It is an evolutionary survival mechanism. Your body thinks it is starving, so it fights back.
Which makes maintaining the deficit difficult.
It makes it nearly impossible for a large percentage of the population. If an exogenous ketone supplement can help maintain that resting metabolic rate, as demonstrated in the nutrient study, and potentially suppress appetite through neurological signaling, it becomes an invaluable therapy. We shouldn't withhold a valid biochemical tool just because bad actors exist in the marketplace. Yes, it must be paired with a caloric deficit, but it has the potential to make that deficit biologically sustainable. We need to educate the public on the difference between a therapeutic ketone ester and a fraudulent gummy, rather than dismissing the entire category of exogenous ketones.
That brings us to a good place to summarize our respective positions in light of our discussion today. My stance remains that the extreme keto influencer ecosystem is fundamentally a commercial mirage. It relies on physical impossibilities, delivering severely underdosed racemic mixtures that, like the two left shoes analogy, cannot physiologically induce ketosis. It sustains itself through an unprecedented level of digital deception, utilizing AI deepfakes of celebrities and investors, and intentionally misappropriating legitimate institutional research to fabricate social proof. Ultimately, this industry serves only to obfuscate the simple, proven reality of caloric deficits. It exploits consumer desperation for profit while delivering biologically inert products.
And to summarize my position, while the current supplement market is undeniably rife with predatory marketing and digital fraud, we absolutely must separate the scam from the science. The biochemical signaling properties of exogenous BHB remain a highly valid and scientifically significant area of metabolic research. When properly dosed and administered, avoiding those racemic pitfalls, exogenous ketones demonstrate real potential to preserve resting metabolic rate, clear lipids like LDL cholesterol, and modulate catabolic pathways to spare muscle during weight loss. This clinical utility shouldn't be discarded simply because of bad actors on social media.
It is clear we share significant areas of convergence on this issue. We both readily agree that the current digital marketing landscape of keto gummies and low-dose pills is entirely fraudulent. These products are severely underdosed, chemically compromised, and their promotion via AI deepfakes is genuinely harmful to consumer health and scientific literacy.
Absolutely. We are fully aligned on the fact that the influencer extreme keto narrative is a scam from top to bottom. Where we continue to disagree is on the underlying molecule itself. I believe the concept of exogenous ketones holds profound practical clinical utility that can and should be redeemed outside of strict dietary interventions, provided the formulation and dosage are correct.
And I remain skeptical that exogenous ketones offer enough independent metabolic benefit to justify their use outside of the rigorous carbohydrate restriction required for true clinical ketosis, especially given how easily the science is weaponized.
Well, looking past the influencer hype, to understand the actual biochemical science is crucial. There is clearly much more to explore at this intersection of metabolic pathways and digital health marketing. The research into ketone signaling is really only just beginning.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.